tell you about myself. I grew up in Alexandria, Virginia, and spent a lot of time in Massachusetts in the summertime. Then went to university in Nashville, Tennessee. And then after I graduated from Vanderbilt, I got a master's degree and some other degrees after that, but ended up working in television for 15 years, I guess, for all the big studios, Sony, NBC Universal. I finished up there having a lot of fun working at a network that was called G4, which is just now relaunching, working on, I basically ran the studio there, which was really fun. And then I had been writing for many years. And so I finally got the courage to start showing some of my work. A lot of it still remained in the drawer, and I brought out other things and reworked. And eventually I was fortunate to get my first graphic novel sold, called The 49th Key. And then I had a debut novel that came out from Tor called Game of Shadows. And I've sort of been writing ever since, which has been great. And yeah, so that's kind of who I am and what I've done. So I kind of work in both the novel space and the comic space. And I recently had my debut YA came out called The Color of Dragons, which I actually co-authored with R.A. Salvatore, which was amazing. And now my first middle grade is getting ready to come out, and it's a series, and I'm so excited for it. So there you have it.
And that is Kelcie Murphy at the Academy for the Unbreakable Arts.
Yes.
Which we're tracking March 5th, wink, wink, esteemed audience.
March 1st.
Show ahead of time. But March 1st, so the book is available now, esteemed audience. By God, go get your copy.
Yes, that's the middle grade that comes out. That story is, would you like a little bit about the story?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So this is a story about a girl who's a foster kid in Boston. Kelcie has had a very tough life. She's been moved around constantly. She has this crazy caseworker who's always been, completely useless in her life, and she finds out why in the very first chapter, because all kinds of craziness breaks loose, and he, along with his accomplices, force her to unleash a great evil upon the world. And when I say the world, I actually mean the other world, because she discovers that she's actually not from here. She's from somewhere else. So Kelcie goes on a journey after them, basically trying to find out who her parents are, because she's never known who her parents are. She was abandoned when she was too young in her mind to remember who they were. She was 5 years old. But when she gets through to this other place, she somehow ends up at this military magic school. She doesn't know what it is. All these kids are in fancy uniforms, all this craziness going on. And the story sort of keeps going from there. She ends up having to test for this school because there's no invitations given. If you can't get past the test, you can't get in. And then she finds out, unlike in a lot of the other stories that I've read over the years, this story, she ends up in literally the most hated group of kids. All of her Fianna, which is her team, are very flawed in their own ways. They're all overcoming obstacles. They're all overcoming different things. And specifically the den that she's in is from a group of people who've been very oppressed, and it's a very hard thing. But she overcomes a lot of these things, and Kelcie's a tough kid, and she powers through, and there you have it. So at the end of the day, it's about saving the other world from this great evil. It's about saving the school from the great evil. It's about saving her friends from the great evil, and they have to work together as a team and overcome a lot of these shortcomings that they feel like they have personally to be able to do that, to save everyone. So that's
Who is the ideal reader for the story?
I don't really know. I mean, I would, the publishers call it 8 and up. I guess it depends upon your reading level as far as whether you like fantasy. I think anyone who's a fan of Star Wars, Avatar, The Last Airbender, anyone who likes to read Percy Jackson kind of stuff. There's a lot of action, a lot of adventure. It's a little darker, a little more than those, but there's still a lot of humor in it. So I don't know, any of the kids who like me could rewatch Avatar: The Last Airbender 5,000 times, or Star Wars Rebels, or Clone Wars, or all those kinds of things. I think there's a lot of that kind of tone in it.
So how excited are you for that new Netflix version of Avatar?
I'm very excited. I'm always skeptical of everything live action, because they're, in the sense of trying to actually have elemental powers. Do you know what I mean? That's a big, bold. So I'm curious to see how it goes. You know what I mean?
Well, I heard M. Night Shyamalan nailed it. I haven't seen the movie, but I heard
really.
No.
You're talking about the movie?
I did not hear.
I don't want to diss the movie because I feel bad. My kids liked the movie when they were little, and I tried. I feel like, the nice thing is that the special effects have finally come around to a place where they have caught up. It's just with Avatar in particular, you're talking about fire bending, and you're talking, you know what I mean? I'm curious to see how that all works out. So we'll see.
Well, without spoiling, if this were to be adapted live action, Kelcie Murphy would need a considerable special effect.
Yes, it probably would need a big budget for special effects.
And you've got the studio, so I imagine you could greenlight this. But if I could say this is greenlit, it's happening for sure, would you prefer that it be an animated series, or would you prefer it be live action?
I think that the book itself fits the world of animation very well. I can already see the animation playing out in my head a little easier, I guess. I don't know.
We'll circle back and talk a little bit more about your time there in Hollywood. But for now, I had some questions I wanted to make sure I asked you about the book. One, I wanted to, kind of a silly question, and not non-spoilery. We encounter an Officer Grimes early on who may or may not actually be a police officer. Who knows? Is that an allusion to the Walking Dead?
Allusion to the what? I missed that last one.
To the Walking Dead?
No, it actually was not. I don't know why, but that character has always been a Killer Grimes to me. And she is in book 2 as well. She's just, she's a character. And no, I actually don't have any. The only homages to anything on the names is that Cillian Murphy, the actor, I was watching Peaky Blinders, and his last name is Murphy, and I was like, oh, that's probably a good name to use because it's probably a really common name. So I literally, Kelcie's name started with Cillian Murphy. So, but yeah,
Scarecrow himself.
Yep. Yep.
Well, that's fun. So now we know for sure it's one person who has to be cast somewhere. Or maybe do the film or animated version.
There we go. He gets a part for free.
Do you have like a dream cast in the back of your mind, or do you just see the characters as themselves?
No, yeah, I don't. And maybe it's just because I have worked in the business. I don't actually see like real life actors in my head when I write the characters. Sometimes I'll use different pictures for inspiration, but they're usually not of anybody that I would be aware of, like in something. So no, I never really think about the cast. I mean, I think for me, one of the most interesting roles are Kelcie's parents, who obviously she finds out something about in the book, and who pop up potentially. And for me, I have an impression of what they would look like, and they're probably the most ones that I have seen actors in my brain a little bit for. But with the kids and with the teachers now, they're also, Skyhawk, the teacher who is the principal of the school, called the preceptor, is actually a lot of the storyline comes right out of Irish mythology. And she's an Irish mythological character who taught all the biggest heroes in Ireland how to fight with magical weapons and martial arts. And she had a school that I went to visit on the Isle of Skye, thousands and thousands of years ago. That's ruins now, called the Fortress of Shadows. It's called Dunsky Castle. And so in my mind, sometimes I have impressions of these specific like legendary characters, like people who've drawn her before because she's a fairly well-known figure. But yeah, not real life people.
I kept imagining her as Aloy from the Horizon Zero Dawn, because I'm counting down, as we record this, I'm counting down the hours to Horizon Forbidden West. That's my big media release of the year. So
yeah.
It's already in my mind. She could be Irish. Why not?
Well, and technically speaking, the Isle of Skye is now a part of Scotland. I don't know back then if it was all kind of like a hodgepodge, but yeah, technically almost everything in the story, except for maybe a few of the more monstrous characters that are from a couple of the Celtic European mythologies. Most of it's all straight from Irish mythology.
So you're there at the Isle of Skye, and you see these ruins, and you learn about the warrior queen. So when does this story start to take root? I never want to ask, where do your ideas come from? But it sounds like maybe there.
It comes from traveling. I lived in the UK for a year during school, and then was constantly going back, and we spend a lot of time there. I spent a lot of time specifically in Ireland, but I had forced my poor kids to go on one of those tour bus things, those small ones. And it was actually kind of funny because when we got on it, there was probably like, I don't know, 10 people. It's like one of those small little Mercedes things. They're not like a big bus, it's a small one. And it was on a tour of the Highlands all the way up to Skye, with the intention of going to Dunsky Castle because I knew I wanted to go see it. I had just had Game of Shadows come out, and my editor was asking me about what I wanted to do next, and if I finally wanted to do middle grade, because that's where my heart is. And I was like, yeah. And she's asking me for a proposal. So I was like, okay, well, I have an idea, but I want to go see this place first. And so they kept stopping, and there were a lot of Outlander fans on the bus. And I love Outlander, don't get me wrong. I love the books, I love the show, I love the actors. I love everything about Outlander. But we kept stopping at all these, like the Castle Leal, we kept all the sites where they were shooting all over. And it's funny because when you come from LA, it's like, I don't want to go to a set, I want to go, you know what I mean? It was like, I don't need to do that right now. But my poor kids, they were like, I think 8, and I don't even know, they were so young at the time. And they were like, really? We're stopping at another ruin and another castle and another location, and it's always Outlander. It was really funny. But that was really fun. So when we got to the Isle of Skye, I was talking to them about the story of the school, because she wouldn't train you unless you could cross her bridge of leaping, which is a part of the story in the book, and the bridge would throw you off. And so every time my daughter would like inch towards getting on the bridge, I'm like, get off don't cross it. There's a big giant hole in it right now, so I don't even know if it would hold up, but you never know. So my inspiration for this story started with that school, the idea of a military school run by this kick butt woman who is just such a legend. And then I wanted to tell a big story. I wanted to talk a little bit about our times, and the kids were sort of fit into the world. I don't know which came first, but each one of the kids in her group has something about them that makes them sort of like the perfect fit for their team together. And the Fianas, as they call it, and Skyhawk puts them together on knowing full well sort of how each of these people are going to play together. And so for me, it was being able to draw upon some a little bit more stories that we're talking about now too, because it is a story about war. It is a story about a never-ending war, between these two places in the other world, and whether they even know why they're still fighting.
So when you go there, then you've already had the conversation with your agent. You need to be thinking of something for a middle grade novel. So that's already your mind is fertile with that.
I was very fortunate. My editor at Tor at the time was also working with HarperTeen and Starscape, and she knew with my voice, even with Game of Shadows, it's about a 14-year-old kid. I like to write for middle grade, and she was great. She was like, yeah, we'd love, I would like to be able to buy something from you again. Would you consider writing me a story set in Celtic mythology for middle grade? And that was sort of my marching orders. And I was like, oh, I got something for you. Sure. So, but then, it's a process. You're still writing a long proposal, and then at least the first 4 or 5 chapters for them to review. And you can't really do, you sell your first book, and then you get somebody who likes your writing, and then I think it's easier to do it that way. But I have to tell you, I'm writing on constant deadlines now, and I wouldn't mind going back to the other direction where you write the whole book first and then you sell, because it's nerve-wracking being under those time constraints. So,
well, with the so you go out and you do the travels, but then there is a fair amount of mythology in the book. It's not a textbook; it's a story, but there's a fair amount of background that you provide for the reader. So, how much research are you doing, and how are you going about doing it?
For most of my stories, I do a lot of research if I'm going to base it in something that's not completely fictionalized. With Irish mythology, I have spent probably a decade researching, because Game of Shadows was also set in Irish mythology, and I worked with a professor at Trinity and drove around to see everything I could and touch everything I could, so that when I was sticking stuff in the story, without spoilers, in book 2, there's stuff about the Stone of Destiny, which is a stone called Failfall that's in the Hill of Tara right outside of Dublin. And in the legend has it that when a new king or queen was going to be coronated, or they needed one, it was like a King Arthur thing. You touch the stone, and the stone would cry out for whoever was the actual chosen person to rule. And it's interesting because there's a Stone of Destiny on the Hill of Tara. There's one in Edinburgh Castle, and it's still the stone that the king or queen in England, in the UK, is actually coronated on. They still use it for coronations, which is crazy. So I went to go see all of that. I went to go see and touch, and because I want to, for me, it's fun, but it's also it's a really interesting part of ancient mythologies that hasn't been explored as much as like Greek mythology and Roman mythology. And I think it's fun to give everybody a really, a real look at those kinds of things for the kids, so that, it's kind of like that movie Indiana Jones. When I was little and I first saw the first Raiders of the Lost Ark, I remember the opening scene where they Harrison Ford's character, Indiana Jones, opens the Bible and he blows the dust off, right, everywhere. And there's this picture of the Ark of the Covenant and the Hebrews all sort of bending down that they put inside and I was like, wow, I got to go look that up when I get home and see what that is, so it was sort of like, okay, as a kid, you pick up little things and then you want to go and you want to research them more. And it just sort of opens your eyes to studying history. And so for me, I like to research a lot. And then I like to throw it all into the crazy pot and just do something strange with all of it,